This is KIRO Radio, 97.3 FM. News and talk, powered by the Pacific Northwest.
The Dori Monson Show on KIRO Radio. This is The Big Lead.
Coming to you from the Carter Subaru Studios and streaming on Facebook Live. Welcome. Every single day I get up, I see what gifts the region is giving a talk show host. So I have this unlimited number of things to chat with you about. And by golly, the city of Seattle has done it once again. Let's get right to the big lead.
The Big Lead. Top story.
So you just heard in Ursula's newscast. The city of Seattle wants to forgive about 200 outstanding warrants as part of their social justice and equity program. Let me go through this press release with and for you because it's really rather remarkable. News release from the city. Today, Mayor Jenny Durkin, City Attorney Pete Holmes, Councilmember Lorena Gonzalez, Chief Carmen Best. They filed a motion in Muni Court asking the court to quash over 200 outstanding warrants for people charged or convicted of low-level nonviolent misdemeanor offenses that occurred 5 to 22 years ago. The city is taking these steps to help address inequities in Seattle's criminal justice system. So let's dive into that a little bit, because most of these warrants are for prostitution and driving with a suspended license. 107 prostitution warrants, 73 driving with a suspended license. Let me read to you what the city of Seattle put in a press release about this. The vast majority of the 208 warrants are for people charged or convicted of prostitution, 107 people, and for driving with a suspended license, 73 people, which is commonly known as driving while poor. You know what? Having been poor for my entire childhood and early adulthood, I can tell you, and having known a lot of people who were poor, that number one, being poor doesn't allow you to break the law. Number two, if you are poor, you don't necessarily have to break the law. So for the city of Seattle to suggest that these crimes were committed because the people are poor and that they should be forgiven because the people are poor. But then they go into the whole race part of this. But here's what Jenny Durkin said, why they're forgiving these warrants.
Let
me start this over.
We're doing this because we recognize that our criminal justice system has disproportionately impacted people of color, and we want to ensure that our officers can focus on the most violent offenders and protect public safety.
Okay, is there any evidence that any of these tickets were written, any of these charges filed because of somebody's race? Because that'd be a big deal if our cops were doing it. But my guess is that the people with a suspended license who were given citations for driving with a suspended license, they probably were ticketed not because of their income status or because of their race. They probably were ticketed because they were driving with a suspended license. I think that would be the commonality between all of this. So Durkin went on to say in the press release, we're acting to make Seattle a more just city, to recognize that our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts people of color. Public safety. So they're saying that there's no public safety risk of all of these people, which either shows that Jenny Durkin has no clue about the stats, or she is intentionally lying to try to make a case so that she can be seen as some great distributor of equitability. People who drive with a suspended license, they get into accidents at a far greater rate than people who actually have a valid driver's license. The stats on that are clear. And I know people who have had life-impacting injuries because their car was plowed into by somebody with a suspended license. And for her to suggest that there's no public safety hazard in forgiving all of this. And also, it is another example of the racism of low expectations. For these, Seattle liberals to say that because somebody's a minority, they're more likely to commit crime, because they're poor, they're more likely to commit crime, and so we're going to just forgive those crimes. And by the way, I think prostitution should not be a crime. But my opinion on what should and should not be charged is irrelevant in all of this. But for the city of Seattle to say that people are committing crimes because of their income status or their race, well, maybe it's not that our criminal justice system is disproportionate. Maybe it's that, an out-of-wedlock birth rate impacts the judgment of people, regardless of race. But, the fewer dads you have in homes, the more likely people are to be poor, and then they tend to commit more crimes. Again, the stats are incontrovertible on all of that. But for Jenny Durkin to say we're going to just forgive stuff because our criminal justice system is inequitable, that would suggest that she's saying that the cops, the judges, the prosecutors, that they are all giving tickets, serving warrants for reasons other than the action of the individual. And then they go through the stats in the press release. The 208 defendants, 111 of them are male, 96 are female, and one is unknown. Well, it sounds like it's disproportionate. It sounds like our criminal justice system is biased against men because there are more male than female warrant holders here. 111 versus 96. 101 of the warrant holders are white. 73 are black. 9 are Asian. 5 are Native American. And 20 were not identified. Now, I'll tell you one other thing. If they thought that the people who have these warrants were likely to ever pay the fine attached to them, no way would the city try to forgive them. If there was a revenue component to all of this, but they're thinking, well, they're not going to pay us anyway, so let's try to score some points. Let's look good. Let's throw out all the buzzwords that will make us look that we are so progressive. It's not costing them anything financially because they're not likely to collect these anyway. But the idea that if you're poor, you somehow are compelled to break the law is insane. As I said, I was poor for most of my life until my 20s, and I know a lot of people who grew up poor, and they didn't commit crimes because of it. So it's just more progressive nonsense from our city of Seattle with this big announcement today. Up next in the Big Lead.
The Big Lead. I sense a Dori rant coming on.
I'm getting a little sick and tired of having to explain my position on climate change. But I see all the comments, I get all the messages that people send when the government over the weekend came out with this very facing all of us. And Jay Inslee, he immediately came out and talked about how it's going to impact our state because he's going to run for presidency based on all of that. In the city of Seattle, our news partners at KIRO 7, they talked to community activists who said a couple of neighborhoods in Seattle could disappear under the rising waters. They talked with activist Paulina Lopez.
So you're saying this right here is how high the water gets?
Yeah, that right there. So we were.
And that's even now?
That is even now. Yes, I have come on days where it comes to the fourth or third, and there. So when I come here with my kids, we're like, what is going to happen when, we were fully hitting sea level rise? And we know as a South Park resident that our neighborhood is going to be impacted the most.
So they say South Park and Georgetown could disappear under the rising waters.
We're particularly vulnerable here in Georgetown.
Why?
Because of the, our proximity to Puget Sound, the high water table. We might be wading around knee deep in water in the next decade or two.
I've been hearing this for 40 years. Out in Lake Forest Park, there was a creek 20 years ago that heavy rains, Lake City Way or Bothell Way, the waters came up over the highway there 20 years ago. We get heavy rains. If you live near water, sometimes the water rises in those heavy rains. Here's the problem with all this. And like I said, I get tired of having to explain my position. I think man plays a role in temperatures. I also believe that this is routinely greatly exaggerated because this is seen as the greatest transfer of money from the private sector to worldwide governmental control in the history of mankind. Trillions and trillions of dollars under the Paris Accord. I also believe that if the water rises some, that man will adapt. Personkind will adapt. That was very insensitive of me. That personkind will adapt. If the seas rise a few millimeters, maybe even a couple of centimeters, that we've adapted for thousands and thousands of years with glaciers forming over western Washington and melting, and man has always adapted to that. I also believe that the technology that is being blamed for all of this, we have the longest lifespan in human history currently because of technology, because of the marvelous advances. We've got hundreds of millions, billions of people who have been lifted out of abject poverty worldwide because of the spread of technology and capitalism. And it's saving a lot of lives when you build people up through stronger advances in medicine and technology, and we're living longer than ever before. And what the climate change arguers want is they want, like with the Paris Accord, they want trillions of dollars transferred, mostly from the United States to other countries. And look at France right now, which is one of the most obsessed countries with turning over control of energy and how we use energy to the government. The socialism in France, you want to talk about the greatest income disparities? The poor people in France are getting so much poorer. There's desperation in the streets. There are riots this last weekend because their fuel prices have gone through the roof. And let's talk about what's happening here in our state. If Jay Inslee, if Jenny Durkin, if Dow Constantine, if all of these people really believed that our impact on the planet and on climate is the most desperate problem facing our species, facing our planet, there's no way we would live our lives the way that we do. I had to go downtown about 2 weeks ago. I had a meeting right after my show. I get off on Union, go down to 5th, turn left. I got to go up 1 block to University to get into a parking garage. It took me 22 minutes to go 1 block from Union to University because downtown is a gridlocked mess. Most of it manufactured by our government leaders. All those cars that are sitting, spewing out emissions so that we can go 1 block. If Jenny Durkin and her predecessors, the accused child rapist and the bearded guy and the Greg Nick, if they all believed in what they spew out, they wouldn't engineer a city that has made it so gridlocked. The other thing we would do, since so much of our workforce is government employees and most of them do not interact with the public, if they really cared about the planet and about traffic and about carbon emissions, you know what they'd do? They'd say, if you're a government employee, your work shift is going to be 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. if you don't interact with the public. But even if you do, how nice would it be to go to the DOL and renew your driver's license at 8:30 at night? You tell half of them, yeah, you'll work a day shift, and half of them are working a swing shift. But no. They don't care about gridlock and the simple things. That wouldn't cost us a penny to flip government workers' schedules. And then the final point is how phony all of these climate arguments have been over the years. And I wrote on my blog a few months ago about the 2 scientists 30 years ago who were given all the press because of their climate predictions, James Hansen and Michael Oppenheimer. They talked about the sea level rise, massive deaths. But instead, with industrialization and with a rising economy, we have more prosperity worldwide. We have more lifespan, a longer lifespan worldwide. They said that the planet would warm by 6 degrees back in 1988. And anybody who challenged them on that was labeled a denier, was labeled like a Holocaust denier. And turns out their predictions of the brightest scientists of the time, they were just way, way off. In Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, he said sea levels would rise 20 feet. He prophesied that the world would, unless we reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, we'd hit the point of no return. The UN said the same thing back in the 1980s. The brightest scientists all turned out to be wrong in their predictions. But now today, you're a denier if you dare question the attempt to transfer trillions and trillions of dollars from private to worldwide governmental control. Because Georgetown is going to go underwater in Seattle if we don't all put solar panels on our roof. It's insanity. But it's a clearly driven financial agenda to return power to this worldwide governmental control from us. We will adapt. We will handle it. And we will continue to make lives better through the technology that is being despised by all these phony climate alarmists. And that is your big lead for today.
The Big Lead on KIRO Radio.
I have just a heartbreaking story to share with you right after the news. It seemed like just another stolen car in Seattle, but the story behind that stolen car will tear you up. You'll hear about it from the victim next on the Dori Monson Show.